Hey, so we have a tenant that's contacting us. She had contacted us right when she moved in, probably about a month after she moved in. Submitted a work order through our property management tenant portal, basically stating that she just hasn't been feeling right, and she doesn't know why hasn't been feeling right. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor, I guess, gave her several steps. I'm not sure what the steps were. Eat bananas and get more potassium, et cetera, et cetera. And he also said you could also maybe check your property for mold. Basically, he just threw up his hands and said, I see nothing. I see no respiratory issues. I see nothing actually wrong with you. So she reached out to us, said, I kind of maybe don't feel well, and I'm wondering if the property has mold. So at this point, we really can't go into a property and just start ripping down ceilings, ripping down walls through an entire property just because a tenant kind of maybe feels that there's a chance the property has to have mold. We actually have to have a reason. And if we had a reason, it would be a more reasonable expense. So if we actually knew the property had a roof leak, if we could see some kind of water damage in a wall, in a ceiling, if we could actually smell a musty smell, the smell of mildew, at least we would know where it is, and in that zone we could actually start addressing. So to protect yourself as a landlord of a rental property, I can't give you legal advice, but here's how I handled it. Is we did send a contractor out there to do a mold test just so we're covered. I wanted the contractor to give me the results directly, to not include the tenant in on the conversation. The contractor came back. There was of course, no sign of mold. We also had him obviously do a visual inspection. We need the property protected. We need the tenant protected if there actually is mold. But the contractor went in there. His sense was that there absolutely positively is no mold. In fact, he actually didn't do the mold test as I directed him to do, because he didn't smell mold, he didn't see mold, he was positive there was no mold, so he didn't see a point to the mold test. I sent him back to do the mold test because we needed it for liability issues. So to me, we now have a little bit better of a legal footing for this inexpensive mold test to say, hey, I sent out a licensed Philadelphia contractor to the property to do a visual inspection, and he did not detect or smell anything along the lines of mold, and we did a mold test. Now, she reached back again several months later saying, hey, I'm still not feeling well, and I'm positive the property has mold. And so she's, the problem is it comes down to a question of optics. So she's threatening to contact Fair Housing or the Housing Authority. She's threatening to contact licensing and inspections, and I'm pretty convinced she'll do that. So if she does that, the optics could go sideways, right? I mean, you actually have a woman who's basically with a baby, who's basically saying, I don't feel well and my property has mold and my landlord won't do anything about it. If you were to call L&I or the housing authority and say those words, they're going to respond. They're going to come after the property management company, in this case us, or the landlord, the property owner. So when they do, what we have is we actually have that we were responsive. As soon as he put this maintenance request in, we sent a licensed Philadelphia contractor out to check it, a third-party entity, not someone who works for our company. And we gave them the directive to please ascertain if there's water infiltration anywhere, and to develop a plan about resolving it, and to do a mold test. So we have that. Then we also have the mold test, so we can actually say we had it tested. We did what we were supposed to do. And then we did send another contractor out just to cover our bases, just to make sure. And we're at this point, I was absolutely positive this property does not have mold. Again, the tenant at no point has vocalized that she has seen mold, that she has smelled mold. The contractor, of course, same, who is more qualified, same thing. So we did send a contractor out again. But I'm just bringing it up. So if and when you get, as a landlord or a property owner, a tenant claiming that they feel that the property has mold or something similar to that, I would probably recommend taking some kind of steps to respond, just so you can actually look good on paper. So as soon as L&I or the housing authority contacts me, as I'm sure they will, I can instantly show them the entire conversation history we've actually had back and forth. And again, just make sure your text history and your communications with your tenants are always, good conversations, because you might want to show it to another individual, or you might be forced to show it to another individual in court, or in this case to L&I or the housing authority, or both. And just basically demonstrate that you took it seriously and you looked into it. Even though you didn't feel there was mold, you actually paid a licensed contractor in your area to go and check this out. And again, a mold test is fairly inexpensive. It's not a big deal. It's worth the money just to have it, to take it and have it, and maybe it'll placate the tenant and prove to the individual that their property doesn't have mold, that maybe she does in fact need to eat more bananas and get more potassium, or whatever it is going on. And I don't mean to be cavalier about it. I guess I do feel a little cavalier about it, because it is getting to be an unreasonable thing. And again, it's super unreasonable, because so for us to go in and to rectify a mold problem, her thought being that the property could potentially have a mold problem. She's claiming it's on every floor of this 3-story home, and plus the basement. So what she's basically suggesting, and I kind of did point this out to her, is you're talking about us ripping down the ceiling and every wall through the entire property. Why would we have to be so extreme? Is because the property doesn't have a mold problem. So to basically start rectifying it, we would actually have to start looking underneath everything to possibly find it. That means looking underneath the ceiling, looking behind the walls, looking under the floor, and then the next floor doing the same thing, the next floor doing the same thing, the next floor doing the same thing. And I was explaining to her, saying, if you don't feel well now, you're really not going to feel well at that point, because at that point, what we're talking about is the property would be a shell, and it would be completely unlivable. So for us to rectify a mold situation, we would actually have to know that there actually is mold there. There would actually have to be a point, that there would have to be, it's behind this wall. It's a bathroom, a toilet wax seal is leaking and it's causing mold in the ceiling. And even then, it's far-fetched, because it would be encapsulated. A lot of things like asbestos and lead and things in mold are not things you want in a property, and they're not things that should be in a property, but encapsulating it does actually go a long way to making it safe. So, if it's behind drywall, if it's behind paint, that actually makes these things a little bit safer. Now, I would say mold and mildew is probably less so than lead or asbestos, certainly, but still somewhat safe. So again, if you're faced with something like this, if someone's actually contacting you, especially if it is something environmental of nature, I would take steps. I would spend some money and take some energy to to show that you're taking it seriously, that you're acting on it, and make sure you actually are using a licensed contractor. So it's better that you use a licensed contractor in an area than it would be for you to go and do a mold test. I mean, you doing a mold test would be one thing, but who's to say that you actually did a mold test? Who's to say that you didn't, just pretend to do a mold test and throw it out? So it's just better to get a third party, pay the small amount of money it's going to cost to have a contractor go do a mold test, do a visual inspection, and just get that on the invoice that the licensed contractor, did an inspection, did a mold test, and found nothing. All right. Just a humble Philadelphia property management company owner doing my very best to answer your rental property investing questions. As always, happy rental property investing.